Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge, a podcast about people in the FinTech space who are thinking through problems very clearly and are enjoying uncommon outcomes as a result of that. I'm Dr. Alice Elizabeth Wilson, founder and CEO of Uncommon, a specialist research and communication studio serving FinTech clients. In each episode, I sit down with someone who I think is brilliant to steal their ideas, insights, and mental models for my own benefit, and now also for yours. Okay, so today I am joined by Soren Godbersen, who is the Chief Growth Officer at EquityMultiple. Thank you for being here with me today, Soren. It's really great to get to talk to you. I love to start these sessions by handing over to my esteemed guest and inviting them to introduce themselves in a way that feels the most interesting and relevant today, right now, which doesn't always include the job title. So, over to you.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, great to be with you, Alice. Excited to talk to you. My name is Soren. As you said, I am Chief Growth Officer at EquityMultiple, which is a real estate investing fintech platform. Essentially, we lower barriers to entry for individual investors who are looking to access commercial real estate. It's a fairly new concept, fairly new industry, and I am essentially tasked with growing our brand, growing our customer base, telling the EquityMultiple story authentically and honestly and compellingly to the market. So essentially, I have CMO duties with EquityMultiple. I've been with the company basically since the early days, fourth employee on board. So I've been with the firm since 2015. Prior to that, I held a variety of jobs in the Seattle area in the digital marketing and MarTech space. So I've done brand work, I've done content marketing work, I've done more sort of heavy analysis and business intelligence type work, all prior to EquityMultiple. And that gave me a foundation for the holistic sort of marketing leadership work that I've done with the company. So probably the most gratifying thing I've done at EquityMultiple over the past 9 years is help to grow a team that's very multifaceted, very talented in terms of doing what I described, which is marketing the EquityMultiple product and growing the EquityMultiple brand. So at this stage of my career, I'm a marketing leader, a generalist, and really love all facets of it. Love the psychological and sort of consumer behavior elements of marketing. Love the creative aspects of it and sort of the narrative and brand design aspects of marketing, as well as the quantitative challenges that come with trying to grow a customer base, trying to grow market share, trying to carve out space, as I said, in a vertical in an industry that's relatively new. So every day is different. And my role covers a lot. So anything in there that's particularly of interest to you, happy to drill down further.
Yeah, thank you so much in there of interest to me. Particularly, I'm relating very strongly to what you said about how working in marketing in a finance space combines really wonderful strands of sociological, psychological analysis and understanding what are people doing and why are they doing it, with the creative components of narrative construction and storytelling, and how do we take people on a journey using language in a way that's intertwined with particular objectives that they're trying to achieve and objectives that we are trying to achieve within the businesses in which we operate. I think that's that sort of melting pot of multiple quantitative and qualitative parts of data analysis and understanding is what brought me to this place, to starting my own company in this space. It allows me to meet multiple appetites all at once. And in my experience so far, every CMO I speak to has a strong sort of creative background or a creative sort of component to their personality, I suppose. I think I found more people who are interested in the storytelling and narrative side of especially content marketing compared to like the pure data analysis numbers side. I wonder if you feel an affinity with more the qualitative aspect or the quantitative component and how that features in the kind of work that you tend to create.
Yeah, that's a good question. As you alluded to, there's the old cliche, marketing is art and science. So I do think you have to have a bit of both, but I would say, if anything, these days I'm gravitating more toward the creative and the narrative elements of the job, of the challenges of growing a brand in an emerging space. And I think that's partly just who I am, partly my personality, where I feel my strengths are. But I think more importantly, as you said, the challenges and work that we do as marketers in the fintech space or in the financial services space is unique. And I think that all marketing is about building trust and knowing who your customer is, getting inside their head and understanding their fears and wants and dreams and desires. But that's particularly true in financial services. It's an extremely emotional product, or set of products to consider. Of course, money is and people's financial future, that's an extremely important aspect of what we spend our time considering and what we spend our money on as far as products go. So I think the narrative aspect of being a marketer in the fintech space, in the personal finance space, and the content marketing challenges that come along with that are particularly interesting. It's particularly important. It's particularly challenging. And I'll give you some examples of that. You have your big institutional asset managers in the finance space, your Goldman Sachs, say, and they might put out a white paper every year, every 6 months, giving market perspective. And those are all, meticulously researched. They're written by very smart people, often with fancy degrees, and really speak a certain language in terms of, here's what's happening in capital markets, here's our view on asset allocation or whatever it is. And as someone working for a quote unquote real estate crowdfunding platform, you can emulate that. But really, the important thing is to, like I said, get into the mindset of your customer, in our case, an individual investor, and really think through, okay, what kind of content is going to be useful to them? What will resonate at a basic level? What's even going to get read by a customer or a prospective customer? And so it might be pivoting the language, pivoting the depth, pivoting the subject matter from something that's more like an institutional white paper to, okay, well, for me as an investor, what is the actual opportunity? What might my portfolio look like if I allocate to real estate instead of my traditional 60-40 stocks and bonds portfolio? So that's a long-winded way of saying really getting inside the head of the customer, prospective customer, and the mindset of the customer and their needs in terms of education, in terms of understanding the opportunity, really critical to the exercise of content marketing.
What do you find are the most challenging components to doing that really well? What's the most difficult thing about really delivering on that?
Yeah, I think it's finding the right balancing point between putting out content that's authoritative. It shares a unique perspective. It's usually quantitatively backed. And, you're really serving the imperative of showing the market, showing the customer that you know what you're doing and that you're doing the work to position your products to fit the moment in terms of what market conditions are. But at the same time, you have to speak language and author content that people are going to understand. It's going to make sense. It's going to resonate. And so I think the real challenge of that, or, sort of how the process works on our end, it's an exercise of getting true subject matter expertise from the people building the product. So in our world, that's our capital markets team. It's real estate professionals who have been in the game for 20 or 30 years, have a super sophisticated knowledge of, what's going on with trends in cap rates and revenue per available square foot and all these like deep in the trenches real estate factors. And I know enough of that world to be able to write at a basic level, but again, to make it truly authoritative and to have something unique and something authentic, you need to bring in the heavy artillery in terms of those subject matter experts. So the challenge then is taking that subject matter expertise and putting it through the appropriate lens in terms of, will this be understood by my customer? What is the appropriate scope and length? And so usually it's sort of an assembly line process in our world. So it's starting with kind of a thesis, and having that thesis support our value prop and our investment products generally. But beyond that, trying to come up with a thesis that, again, represents some unique perspective on the market. And then working with those subject matter experts on our real estate team or on our asset management team to, flesh out a draft of content that's probably too in-depth, probably too rich in details to ultimately be useful as a piece of marketing collateral. And then working with our investor relations team, working with copywriters on our marketing team to sort of pare that down and come out with the most compelling nuggets. Then usually we go through a design process of, okay, how can we tell this story more visually? How can we add some visual elements that are on brand and that really drive the thesis home, at the same time helping us, just chop character count? Because let's be honest, no one's going to read 5,000 characters at this point. And usually, we'll probably talk more about this, but at that point we have, a thesis that's represented in text and represented with some visuals to accompany the text. And probably we're going to turn that into more of an omni-channel content marketing campaign. So can we also put some video around this? And that might take the form of our director of investor relations interviewing that same subject matter expert from the real estate team. And, that becomes something that we use across organic social platforms that, we have on our YouTube channel. Maybe even that becomes a feature of a monthly webinar for our more sophisticated investors. So we're always thinking as well, once we've done the work of bringing in subject matter experts and really telling this story in the most compelling way, how can we get the most mileage out of that and have customers and prospective customers select into the type of media that they want to consume, and that's going to be most beneficial to them in terms of educating themselves. So that may have been more detailed than you were asking for, but
that's great. Yeah,
how we approach that challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned there about, for example, webinars for more sophisticated investors, which suggests to me that you have some kind of ideal customer avatar, say, segmented into they're just beginning their alternative asset investment journey. They're at a fairly basic educational level, all the way up to these are potentially institutionally experienced accredited investors with multiple alternative assets, and they're looking specifically for the type of benefits that private credit can bring in this exact environment of banks tightening up their lending and inflation risk and stuff. So is that the case, that you have sort of content pillars aimed specifically at those different levels of need and education?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. That's a very good point. And I think this is another facet I would add to the challenge in general of crafting content marketing in this space. Yes, we do have multiple different avatars or customer personas, or however you would think of it. And our addressable market is accredited investors. So per SEC regulations, we're only able to offer investments to accredited investors. But that said, that's still 24 million households in the US. And that number has grown by about 50% since 2019. Among other factors, there's been a fair amount of growth in income in that sort of tranche of the population, which is good news. So that number has grown. There are accredited investors who can verify or qualify as accredited investors by income. So that's 200K per year, or by net worth. So that's $1 million in investable assets. And if you look at just those two definitions of accredited investor, the former, the income definition, tends to align more with younger individuals, those who are sort of earlier in their investing career. And to put some more detail around that, we find in practice that a large percentage of our investors are doctors, physicians. So that's about 30 to 35% of our investor base. And that tends to align more with that relatively young, more likely to be income verified accredited investor versus, someone who's more likely to be verified by net worth, probably a bit older, has probably been investing for a while. They've probably participated in some real estate investments, via offline syndications, or maybe they bought their own triplex or whatever at some point. And so those individuals might be, small business owners. They might be in a finance field. They might just be retirees who, were in some lucrative career for a number of years. And so those are sort of the two, at a basic level, those are the two customer personas that we consider in terms of crafting content, delivering educational value, helping people get comfortable with the opportunity and understand the space. And it's a bit more complex than that. We do some clustering analysis, and that's actually a great AI use case these days to arrive at different customer personas. But basically, those are at a high level, those are the two avatars that we consider. So if you continue with that doctor example, let's say that median prospective investor is around 40 to 45 years old. They got out of, let's say they got out of residency 7 or 8 years ago. They've been maxing out their 401k. They understand at a basic level that real estate is private market real estate as an uncorrelated asset might be a favorable place to go, now that they're sort of at cruising altitude with their stocks and bonds portfolio, but they may not know a whole lot more about real estate. They might be super busy. They might, they're starting a family, or they're like in the throes of managing a household, and they still are, working however many hours a week with their practice doing that important work. So they really want to educate themselves. These are detail-oriented people. They don't want to make dumb investment decisions, of course. And so they're looking at us for that. And again, this is where it's important to both understand the level of detail that you want to operate at, and perhaps offer different levels of detail for different customer personas, as well as operate in more of an omni-channel way and across different types of media. Because, and we have a podcast series too, because it might be, okay, this physician's only real time to educate themselves on real estate is when they're driving from home after, making breakfast for their kids to put on scrubs and start their day. So they're going to fire up a podcast episode. So we want to have that content available to them too. But on the other side of the coin, yes, there might be investors who say they're 10 million net worth and they've been doing this for a long time, and they're reading every word of the investor packets, as everyone should, but they're really getting super deep in the details, and they want to look to us as a true authority in the space. And they might want to understand, okay, like, how does your model operate to identify the top 10 multifamily markets to invest in the country? And that's just going to make, going back to our 42-year-old physician, like, that might just make their eyes completely glaze over. But for this more sophisticated investor, they really want to understand that we know what we're doing, and they want a deeper level of insight. So in that case, we might be having, like I said, a 45-minute webinar that will record and turn into video content, but that's going to be relatively dry and probably not for everyone in terms of that other persona. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think the omnichannel approach is so wise and so rooted in actual empathy with the human beings that we're communicating with, and how to serve them exactly where they are, exactly when they are. And the driving between making breakfast for kids and on the way to work is a perfect example of doing that deep empathy work, which I think is at the core of all excellent communication. And like we've already touched on, content marketing is just fundamentally communication. And so the deeper a company and a person can lean into that empathy and really taking the position of the other and imagining their lives as richly, as well illustrated as they possibly can, I think is one of the core differentiators between good content marketing and excellent content marketing. And for example, something like a white paper, which can be an enormously valuable asset for a company to have, principally because it shows prospects that that company can be bothered to put the amount of effort in that it takes to research, draft, outline, redraft, edit, UX, design an asset of that caliber. It's so high effort that it already indicates, doesn't prove, but it indicates a level of effort and willingness to engage in detail. But it's very rarely anybody's first port of call. The first touch is, I'm going to say it's never a white paper, but what it could be is one key data point statistic from that white paper distributed omnichannel. So through could be an Instagram post, it could be a LinkedIn post. Here's something interesting for you that's going to help you understand. That's it. It took 10 seconds. Thank you. And the next right step could be another one of those posts, or a click through to the website where there's a slightly longer form blog, but just like a 500 word, quick 5-minute read. And then the next right step could be to get a bit more detail on that conversationally through the podcast, and on and on and on until the person reaches the white paper. And that's that sort of slow, consistent way that the relationship is built, right? And I know that EquityMultiple talks a lot about trust. You've mentioned it yourself already in this conversation. And it comes up a lot in your website copy on the EquityMultiple website, to do with, like your 3 core values: focus, earning trust every day is something that's specifically outlined there. And I think it all seems interlinked to me, this deep work of empathy, taking the position of the other, using practical operationalizing tools like omnichannel marketing in order to show that you are doing that deep empathy work. And that's how you earn that trust, regardless of where in their investment journey that person is.
Yep. Yeah, that's well said. And again, that goes to, I think, the importance with your example of, pulling out, a given interesting data point or finding, and then using that as a standalone piece of content. And that really helps you meet people where they are in terms of how much time they have, what media they like to consume, what's going to be interesting to them. Can I ask you a question? And then I'll give you some perspective too. In terms of that empathy exercise, in terms of understanding who the customer is, what they need, what type of content marketing is going to resonate with them, what does that exercise look like in your experience, or in terms of the other marketing leaders that you've talked to?
That's a lovely question. So from my own perspective, the way I run my own business, what doing proper empathy work with my own clients looks like is being very, very slow to make an offer. So not coming in with, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, I can do that, because I haven't spent any time yet finding out what's going on for you, what's important for you, what are you trying to achieve, what have you tried, and what outcomes did you get, what did you like, what didn't you like. For me, there has to be a real genuine time dedicated to research and understanding, to properly listening to what is going on in that person's life, to what is going on in that company's life, so to speak. And sometimes that is more challenging to do than others, because I'm running a business and I also have to make my own revenue goals and keep everything running over. And sometimes I really need to bring on a new client, and sometimes it's more relaxed, but to always center the other person's needs rather than my own is where the journey starts, of like actually serving and making sure that the fit is there, not just because I would like some money, please. And I think that really comes across. And I think that that's a similar thing that makes excellent content in any industry, including in financial services and FinTech, where the content is obviously to do with, I'm trying to reach out to you and give you something useful. It's an offer rather than an ask.
Yes, it's a good way to put it. That reminds me of one of my favorite marketing bromides that I repeat to the team all the time is, your brand is not what you say it is, it's what other people say it is, especially your customers. So I think you were pointing to this too. You can bring to bear all sorts of analysis tools and third-party data and say, okay, my customer, drives an Audi and lives in this zip code and probably likes baseball and subscribes to a wine club or whatever. But that's not really going to tell you who they are or how to talk to them. It's probably useful on some level and gives you some breadcrumbs, but really you have to do the time consuming work of actually talking to people. The thing that I found is that you don't get like a huge sample size necessarily or something quantitative to use in terms of piece of content marketing X should be about Y and is going to deliver an ROI of Z dollars or whatever. But it's really a matter of, okay, I talked to someone for a half an hour and this told me things about how our customer is thinking, what really led them to consider making an investment or to enter this space, how they're perceiving us, how they're perceiving other brands in the space, what their true motivations are. And every time I talk to a customer or a prospective customer, I learn something new. And, again, you just find over and over again that putting your head in the sand and deciding you're going to tell other people, namely your customer, what they should be thinking about is not the way to build a brand, not the way to think about content marketing. You really have to understand who your customer is. And the best way to do that is straight up to have a conversation with them, which is, again, it's time consuming, but it's well worth it.
And that's kind of the whole point, right? It's time consuming, which is what makes it so valuable. I'm a big fan of processes that don't scale, basically. And I'm sure I will run into complications with this at various points in my own business growth. However, I remain a staunch fan of the unscalable, the personal, the intimate, the connected. It's such a rich experience on a human level to connect with a person one-on-one and find out stuff about their lives. This is my bias also, right? Because I've just earned my PhD in sociology. Connecting with people and finding out what they're doing and how they're feeling about that is one of the core strands of my identity. It's an enduring fascination of mine. But I also find it extremely useful and rewarding in a business context. Something, for example, that I love to do is to send people things in the post. Now, sometimes these people are my clients, sometimes they're people who I definitely won't be working with, sometimes they're people who I might work with in the future, but I love to send handwritten letters, I love to send books that I think they'd enjoy. Totally unscalable, seriously impractical way to spend my limited resources as a CEO of my own studio. But it just feels so good and it leaves such a great impression and it's very sincerely done. You know what I mean? That it's like the opposite feeling of cold email outreach. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I'm taking a long-term view to this because, like we've already spoken about, the view is on relationship building and trust building, and that is something that just definitionally cannot be rushed. So I see this as like planting little seeds that will flourish in ways that are going to benefit everybody, even if it's got nothing to do with a monetary benefit. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And you're not going to do it and say, this was the ROI I got on that, because it's impossible to know that. And that's not the point. And yeah, to add to what you said, I think if you do want to think about this sort of in cynical, businessy terms, when you do things that don't scale, when you do things that are more human, when you do things that are harder to measure but feel authentically right to you, you have a competitive advantage because other people aren't doing it. Marketers want things that are, you can show to your CFO and it's going to impress them, things that have like provable ROI or whatever. So there's a ton of competition there. And that, whether that's like, paid search ads or whatever it is, LinkedIn ads, and that drives up the cost of those things because everyone thinks they're going to get a provable result there. But you're engaged in something that's not building an authentic relationship, and you're doing something that everyone else is doing. So I think, to your point, when you receive a book or whatever it is, something in the post from an actual person, that really stands out. That really cuts above the noise because most people don't take the time to do that.
Yeah.
Most people think that they're not going to do that because the ROI is not there or is not provable. So yeah, I'm with you 100%.
I think it's something that possibly more and more people are going to start paying attention to with the influx of so for example, organic search, it seems like is going to be almost entirely taken over by AI generated snippets that are coming up at the top of Google. It looks like that's sort of the way it's going to go. So it seems like what's happening at the moment is that search engines' own AIs are gathering the top 3 search engine results pages, synthesizing them, and giving them to searchers at the top of it. So there's no more click through into web pages anymore for the broadest SEO search terms. So organic traffic in that way is going to completely disappear for a lot of websites. It's happening already. But what it does open up opportunity in is much longer and more detailed search questions. So for example, instead of why should I invest in alternative assets? No one's going to get traffic for that anymore, more or less. But how can I use passive income strategies with an alternative asset allocation of 20% in my 50s is very unlikely, comparatively, to have enough content already on Google to make an adequate AI summary. And this is where companies and brands are really going to be able to give above and beyond value that search engines can't themselves. And it's because this type of content is much more high effort. Again, it's more difficult to write useful original information about answering all that very specific question, especially if you want to enrich it with primary data collection, which in my opinion you always should. It's one of the best and clearest ways to demonstrate value. This is something that doesn't exist anywhere else on the internet, because I went and asked this person these particular questions to get this information to tell it to you. So there's lots of doors opening.
Yes, and I'm optimistic that how AI is broadly delivering knowledge, or will broadly deliver knowledge, and how search engines react to that is going to take some of the grossness out of SEO. Probably even a year ago, if you were to use your example of that long tail query, you would probably find nothing. But if you search for something more down the fairway, you might get all sorts of results that are optimized to capture eyeballs, to capture traffic, but aren't actually delivering a whole lot of value. And so what the true utility of a search engine should be, delivering results that are semantically relevant to the person and to the query. I'm optimistic that that's going to come back. And to your point, that should really serve those content marketers that are producing content for the right reasons and, really doing it with the end consumer of that content, the customer in mind. So fully agree.
I'd love to close off our conversation by asking you if there's anything coming up in your life in the near future that you're especially excited about or interested in, content marketing wise.
Yeah, well, to keep it on the AI topic, I am very excited about not necessarily the writing aspects or the writing assist aspects of AI, because I think number one, there's still a long way to go there. And number two, I'm not confident that AI is ever going to produce the type of narrative that's going to be truly compelling to everyone. I could be wrong about that, but I think at least in the near term, there's going to be that more introduces an opportunity for authentic content marketers, sticking with same with that SEO example, to produce pieces of content and to produce narrative that is obviously not generated by AI and was made by one human for another human. But what I am excited about is sort of the data science applications and some of the ways that it can streamline producing insights and producing visuals and different interpretations of data and synthesis of data that can turn into really interesting stories. And that's a huge efficiency gain for content marketers. Someone who is on my team and may have zero background in data science can still understand enough to say, okay, I'm going to feed these two disparate data sets into an LLM, and it's going to take some coaching of it, but we're going to get to something that's a truly novel insight that would have taken even a professional data scientist probably days, if not weeks, to come up with. So I think that's going to produce a lot of really interesting content marketing opportunities. So that's one example. Another thing I'm excited about, or another thing I'm really looking forward to, and this is top of mind right now, is just the next phase of the market cycle with respect to our industry. So the Fed cut rates by 0.5 point earlier this week. We expect more of that. It's just, this is both challenges and opportunities, but I think the next phase of the market, there was candidly probably a period of 2 years or so where transaction volume was super low in real estate markets. And related to that, I think individual investors were leery of trying something new. So I think now, entering 2025, it's going to be a more favorable market for real estate, but also it might be a slightly different customer mindset and maybe a slightly different investor or set of customer personas that we're talking to, that we're telling the story to, that we're helping educate to understand, why real estate might be a good fit for their portfolio or what's going on in real estate markets. So I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge. It sort of shakes things up in terms of the subject matter and how we talk about our space and how we talk about the product. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, both really cool things. When people listen to this and they want to keep up with what you're working on, they want to connect with you, or they want to find out more about EquityMultiple, where would you like them to go to do those things?
Well, there's always interesting stuff happening on the blog. So that's just EquityMultiple.com/blog. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, and I think that's /Soren Godbersen, just my full name. But if that doesn't work, you're probably savvy enough to find me. Yeah, I don't have my own blog currently, but I write articles on LinkedIn frequently, giving perspective on various marketing things. So I'd love to hear from you. Drop a line anytime.
Awesome. It's been so good to talk to you, Soren. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for your time and all your generosity, your insights.
Likewise, Alice. It's been fun. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, see you next time. That's it for this episode of Uncommon Knowledge. I hope you learned something new or got an unfamiliar way to look at a familiar problem. Until next time, I wish you all good things, and I'll catch you on the next episode.